My name is Sienna. I am 33 years old. My mother-in-law sneered as she threatened to have me committed to a mental hospital right in front of my young son. She was convinced no one would believe me. But one shocking truth destroyed her plan and turned the entire family against her. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door of my home in Buckhead, Atlanta. After a grueling 10-hour day at the office, all I wanted was to kick off my heels and hug my 6-year-old son, Jamal. Instead, I stepped into the marble foyer and froze. My clothes were scattered across the pristine floor. 3 of my suitcases lay thrown against the grand staircase, their zippers busted, and my personal belongings spilling out onto the expensive rugs. Sitting on my custom white leather sofa was Valerie, my mother-in-law. At 59 years old, Valerie considered herself the ultimate matriarch of Atlanta's black elite. She was dressed in an immaculate emerald green silk suit, her signature pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. She held a crystal glass of my expensive red wine in one hand and a thick stack of medical papers in the other. She did not look like a woman visiting her daughter-in-law. She looked like a predator who had just cornered her prey. Valerie took a slow sip of her wine and smiled. It was a cold and calculated smile. She tossed the stack of papers onto the glass coffee table. The bold red letters at the top of the first page caught my eye immediately. It was a signed involuntary psychiatric hold form. "You have exactly 5 minutes before the ambulance arrives," Valerie announced. Her voice echoed through the high ceilings of my living room. "The paramedics are on their way to take you to the psychiatric ward at Oak Ridge Hospital. We have already spoken to the intake director. They are expecting a highly aggressive, delusional woman who has completely lost her mind. Do not bother fighting them, Sienna. It will only make you look crazier." I stood perfectly still. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air like a physical weight. I did not scream. I did not drop my briefcase. My professional training had taught me to assess a threat before reacting. I looked past Valerie and saw my husband Darius emerging from the kitchen. Darius was 35 years old, a former college track star who now worked as a wealth manager. He wore his tailored designer suits like armor, hiding his deep insecurities behind a charming smile that fooled everyone in our social circle. Right now, that smile was gone. He was carrying Jamal in his arms. My sweet, innocent little boy had tears streaming down his face, his small hands gripping his father's shirt tightly. Mommy, Jamal cried out, reaching for me. I took a step forward, my maternal instinct screaming at me to snatch my son from his arms. But Darius stepped back, pulling Jamal tightly against his chest. He looked at me with an expression of manufactured pity, perfectly playing the role of a heartbroken husband. "Sienna, you are sick," Darius said. His voice was soft and laced with fake concern. "You have been hallucinating for months. You are stressed, paranoid, and you are becoming a danger to yourself and to our son. Just go quietly with the paramedics. Get the help you need. I will take good care of Jamal while you are locked away. I have already filed the emergency custody paperwork this afternoon. You need to focus on healing your mind." The betrayal was absolute. The man I had shared a bed with for 7 years was standing in our living room, using our crying child as a prop, actively participating in a plot to institutionalize me. He was trying to gaslight me in my own home. They wanted me to break down. They wanted me to scream and throw things. They wanted me to validate the psychiatric hold by acting like a hysterical, unstable woman. But I am not an ordinary woman. I do not break. I slowly set my briefcase down on the marble floor. I took a deep breath, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored trench coat. I looked directly into Darius's eyes. I saw the slight tremor in his jaw. I saw the cowardice hiding behind his broad shoulders. He could not even maintain eye contact with me for more than 3 seconds. "How much did she pay you, Darius?" I asked. My voice was dangerously calm. It cut through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "How much money did your mother promise you to sell out your own wife and traumatize your son?" Darius flinched. He opened his mouth to speak, but Valerie quickly stood up, cutting him off. "Do not speak to my son that way," Valerie snapped. She walked over and stood protectively in front of Darius. He is simply doing what is necessary to protect this family from a low-level freelance bookkeeper who forgot her place. You really thought you could blend in with us, Sienna. You thought your little working-class background could fit into our world. I am the president of the most prestigious philanthropic foundation in this state. My family represents excellence. You represent a liability. Valerie reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a heavy platinum credit card, tapping it against her manicured fingernails. Her arrogance was suffocating. You have absolutely no power here, Valerie boasted. Her eyes gleamed with malice. I have judges on my speed dial. I fund the campaigns of the local police chiefs. With one swipe of this card, I can buy any narrative I want. I bought the doctor who signed your commitment papers. I paid for the private ambulance that is pulling into your neighborhood right now. By tomorrow morning, the entire community will hear the tragic story of how Darius had to commit his unstable wife. And because you will be heavily sedated in a padded room, no one will ever hear your side of the story. You are finished, Sienna. I looked at the platinum card in her hand. It caught the light of the crystal chandelier hanging above us. That card was the source of her false superiority. It was the weapon she used to control her children, her friends, and her charity board. She thought money made her a god. She thought it made her immune to consequences. Valerie took another sip of wine, clearly enjoying her performance. She walked slowly around the coffee table, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She wanted to savor my destruction. You see, Sienna, Valerie continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We are actually doing you a favor. The mental health facility at Oak Ridge is very comfortable. They have beautiful gardens. You will get 3 meals a day and plenty of medication to keep those nasty little delusions away. And while you are resting, Darius will take full control of your finances. It is standard procedure for an incapacitated spouse. We will manage your assets. We will raise Jamal in a proper environment free from your negative influence. I shifted my gaze back to Darius. Jamal was sobbing quietly into his father's shoulder. My heart ached for my son. He was terrified, confused by the sudden chaos in his home. Darius stroked Jamal's hair, playing the role of the comforting parent perfectly. Tell her, Mom, Darius muttered. Tell her it is for the best. Darius could not even take responsibility for his own actions. He needed his mother to validate his betrayal. He was a weak man who hid behind the wealth and status of his family name. He had spent our entire marriage pretending to be a financial genius, but I knew the truth. I knew about the late-night phone calls from creditors. I knew about the aggressive knocks on the door when he supposedly owed money to the wrong people. I knew he was desperate. You are a pathetic excuse for a father, Darius, I said. The words hit him hard. He blinked, clearly shocked that I was not breaking down in tears. You are standing there holding a child you barely spend 10 minutes a day with, pretending you care about his well-being. You are using him as a shield because you are too cowardly to face me like a man. Shut your mouth! Darius snapped. His charming facade cracked for a brief second, revealing the angry, desperate boy underneath. You do not know what you are talking about. You are crazy. The doctor said so. The doctor you paid, I corrected him. Or rather, the doctor your mother paid. Valerie laughed again, a harsh and grating sound. Who cares who paid him, she mocked. A signature is a signature. The law does not care about your conspiracy theories. No one can save you now, Sienna. The papers are signed. The medical transport is outside. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out my phone. The smooth metal felt cold against my palm. I did not dial emergency services. I did not call a lawyer. I opened my contacts, pressed a single number, and turned on the speakerphone. The dialing tone echoed loudly in the tense living room. Who are you calling? Valerie demanded. Her eyes narrowed as she watched my fingers move across the screen. Are you calling your little freelance accounting clients to say goodbye? Because I assure you, no one is going to answer a call from a mental patient. I kept my eyes locked on Valerie's face as the call connected. A crisp, professional voice came through the speaker, filling the silent room. Good evening, this is the Executive Client Service Desk at Sterling National Bank. Am I speaking with the primary authorized account holder? Yes, I replied smoothly. My voice never wavered. This is Sienna. I need to execute the overriding protocol we discussed this morning regarding the primary family trust. Valerie stopped laughing. Her posture stiffened. She glanced at Darius, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Darius looked equally bewildered, his grip on Jamal loosening slightly. Understood, the bank executive said over the speaker. Initiating protocol now. All accounts associated with Valerie and Darius are officially frozen. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Valerie. The platinum card in her hand suddenly looked very heavy. I watched the confidence drain from her eyes, replaced by a sudden creeping dread. The trap she thought she had set for me was actually the cage I had built for her, and she was just beginning to realize the doors were locked. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Valerie. The platinum card in her hand suddenly looked very heavy. I watched the confidence drain from her eyes, replaced by a sudden creeping dread. The trap she thought she had set for me was actually the cage I had built for her, and she was just beginning to realize the doors were locked. "What did you do?" Valerie demanded, her voice losing its previous arrogant ring. She lowered her hand, the credit card now clutched tightly in her fist. I did not respond to her directly. I kept my eyes fixed on her face, watching the realization dawn on her. The bank executive's voice crackled again through the speaker of my phone. "Ms. Sienna." The executive continued, his tone remaining perfectly neutral. "I confirm that all overriding protocols are now active. Access to the primary family trust, all associated platinum and black cards, and the joint checking accounts has been suspended. Any attempts to authorize transactions will be automatically declined. The freeze will remain in effect until further notice from you." Valerie's face contorted in disbelief. She took a step toward me, her perfectly manicured hand pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are lying," she shrieked. "That is impossible. You do not have the authority to freeze my accounts. I am the primary beneficiary of the estate." "No, Valerie," I said calmly. "You were the primary beneficiary of the estate until your late husband realized you were bleeding his legacy dry. He amended the trust documents 5 years ago. He made me the sole overriding authority because he knew you could not control your spending. He trusted me with the keys to the kingdom." Darius, who had been silent, finally spoke up. His voice trembled with panic. "Sienna, what is going on? You cannot do this. We have bills to pay. We have the mortgage, the country club dues. You cannot just cut us off." I turned to Darius. The fake concern he had displayed moments ago was completely gone. He was no longer playing the heartbroken husband. He was just a desperate man watching his safety net disappear. "I am not cutting you off, Darius," I said. My voice was steady, contrasting sharply with his rising panic. "I am protecting the family assets from suspicious activity. It is my fiduciary duty, as the overriding authority of the trust. If you have concerns, you can file a formal inquiry with the bank's legal department. But I warn you that process usually takes about 6 months." Darius looked at his mother, seeking guidance, seeking permission to act. But Valerie was speechless. She was staring at her platinum card as if it had suddenly turned into a piece of useless plastic. The realization that she was financially paralyzed had finally hit her. The tense silence in the living room was broken by the sound of the front door swinging open. Laughter and loud voices echoed from the foyer. Keisha and Trayvon, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, burst into the house. They were dressed in designer clothes, carrying crystal champagne flutes, completely oblivious to the shifting power dynamic in the room. Keisha strutted into the living room, her expensive heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Trayvon followed close behind, holding a bottle of expensive champagne, a smug grin plastered across his face. They looked like they were arriving at a celebration, and in their minds they were. They were celebrating my destruction. "Well, well, well," Keisha said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Look who is still here. I thought the ambulance would have taken the crazy lady away by now. I guess even the mental hospital doesn't want you." Trayvon laughed, pouring more champagne into his glass. "Give them a minute, babe. They are probably just looking for a straitjacket in her size." Keisha took a sip of her champagne and looked me up and down with obvious disgust. She had always made it clear that she considered me beneath them. To her, I was just a working-class girl who had somehow manipulated her way into their elite family. "You know, Sienna," Keisha said, leaning against the back of the leather sofa, "I always knew you did not belong here. You do not have the breeding for our kind of life. You are socially unfit for a family like ours. Your low-level genes are a stain on the black elite. It is honestly a relief that you are finally showing your true colors. Once you are locked away, we can finally scrub your name from our social circles. I did not flinch. I let her finish her little speech. Keisha was a textbook narcissist, obsessed with maintaining a luxurious influencer lifestyle on social media. Her entire existence was built on likes, comments, and the perception of wealth. She was a hollow shell of a woman, and her insults meant absolutely nothing to me. Trayvon stepped forward, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. He puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "Do not worry about the paperwork, bro," Trayvon said to Darius, slapping him on the back. "I took care of everything. I paid the doctor to sign the hold. It was a piece of cake. A little cash goes a long way." Trayvon gestured toward the foyer. A man stepped into the living room. He was tall, thin, and wearing a cheap suit that did not quite fit right. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the luxurious room, as if he expected someone to throw him out. This was the doctor Trayvon had hired. "Allow me to introduce Dr. Vance," Trayvon announced proudly. "He is the one who officially declared Sienna a danger to herself and others. His signature is all we need to get her locked up." Dr. Vance offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. He clutched a leather briefcase to his chest, clearly out of his depth. He looked less like a medical professional and more like a man who had just agreed to participate in a very illegal scheme. "Good evening," Dr. Vance said. His voice was slightly raspy. "I assure you my medical assessment is completely sound. The paperwork is fully executed." I looked at the man standing by the door. I recognized him immediately. My investigations often crossed paths with individuals like him, people who operated on the fringes of the law, selling their credentials to the highest bidder. I did not need to run a background check. I already knew everything I needed to know about him. I slowly walked toward the center of the room, closing the distance between myself and the so-called doctor. The air in the room grew thicker. I could feel Valerie, Darius, Keisha, and Trayvon watching my every move. They expected me to argue. They expected me to deny the assessment. They expected a hysterical reaction. Instead, I stopped a few feet away from Dr. Vance and stared directly into his eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. "Dr. Arthur Vance," I said softly. The doctor's uncomfortable smile instantly vanished. He took a small step backward, his grip on the briefcase tightening. "Yes," he replied hesitantly. I continued to stare at him, my expression completely unreadable. "Medical license revocation number 84922C," I recited smoothly. The numbers flowed from my memory with perfect precision. "Disbarred by the State Medical Board exactly 3 years ago." The primary charges included systemic prescription fraud writing, illegal scripts for controlled substances, and participating in a kickback scheme with a local pain clinic. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Vance's face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I took another step closer to him. The scent of cheap cologne and nervous sweat wafted from him. "Tell me, Arthur." I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Does the state board know you are still practicing medicine without a license? Do they know you are forging psychiatric holds for cash? Because I am quite certain that is a felony offense. And given your previous convictions, I imagine a judge would not be very lenient during sentencing." Trayvon's smug grin vanished. He looked at Dr. Vance, panic beginning to show in his eyes. "What is she talking about, Doc?" Trayvon demanded. "Tell her she is crazy. Tell her you have a license." Dr. Vance did not look at Trayvon. He kept his eyes locked on mine. He recognized the tone in my voice. He recognized the specific phrasing. He knew he was not dealing with a hysterical housewife. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. I think there has been a misunderstanding," Dr. Vance stammered. He began to back away slowly toward the front door. "There is no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "You accepted money to falsify medical documents to involuntarily commit a sane woman. You are an accessory to kidnapping and fraud. The only question now is whether you want to try and run, or if you want to stay and explain yourself to the authorities." Valerie finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "This is a trick," Valerie shouted, pointing at me. She is lying. She is making this up to confuse us. Do not listen to her, Trayvon. She is insane. But Dr. Vance was not listening to Valerie. He was looking at me, and he saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. He saw the cold, hard facts that could destroy whatever was left of his life. He did not need a confession from me. He knew I had him dead to rights. I have to go, Dr. Vance mumbled. He turned and practically ran out the front door, leaving it wide open behind him. The living room descended into chaos. Trayvon started yelling, trying to call the doctor back. Keisha was staring at me, her mouth hanging open in shock. Darius was holding Jamal tighter, looking around the room as if expecting the walls to close in on him. Valerie was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she stared at the open doorway. The carefully constructed plan she had orchestrated to institutionalize me and seize control of my life had just collapsed in front of her eyes. Her fake doctor had fled, her accounts were frozen, her power was gone. I turned back to face my in-laws. I surveyed the room, taking in their panicked expressions. They had thought I was weak. They had thought I was a victim they could easily manipulate and discard. They had severely miscalculated. Well, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. It seems the medical transport will not be necessary after all. But do not worry, Valerie. The night is still young, and I am just getting started. The living room had descended into chaos after Arthur fled. Trayvon was shouting, pacing the floor and frantically dialing the disgraced doctor's number, only to be sent straight to voicemail. Keisha stood near the entryway, her designer champagne flute trembling in her hand. Darius held Jamal tighter, looking around the room as if expecting the walls to close in on him. Valerie was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she stared at the open doorway, her grand plan crumbling before her eyes. Keisha finally snapped out of her shock. She slammed her champagne glass down on a side table, the expensive crystal ringing sharply. She strutted toward me, her face contorted with the kind of rage reserved for those whose fragile egos have just been punctured. "You think you are so smart!" Sienna Keisha screamed. Her voice was shrill, losing all its cultivated upper-class polish. "You are nothing but a jealous, broke bookkeeper. You are furious because you will never be one of us. You do not have the money, you do not have the style, and you do not have the pedigree. And guess what? You are still going to rot in a padded cell." Keisha whipped out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "I already recorded a video of you screaming and acting like a lunatic yesterday," Keisha threatened, holding the phone up like a weapon. "I am posting it to all my followers right now. 2 million people are going to see the real Sienna. I am going to expose your fake mental breakdown. My followers will destroy whatever is left of your pathetic reputation before the ambulance even gets here." I watched her, feeling nothing but profound pity. Keisha lived her entire life for the approval of strangers on the internet. She curated an image of immense wealth and success, a perfect representation of the Black elite she claimed to embody. But I knew the truth about the influencer illusion she had built. I calmly walked over to my briefcase, which was still sitting on the marble floor. I snapped the latches open and reached inside. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of manila folders, each one stamped with official legal seals. I stood up and walked directly toward Keisha. "You want to expose something, Keisha?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Let us expose the truth." I tossed the first folder. It hit her chest and fell to the floor, spilling official documents across the hardwood. "That is the foreclosure notice on your $5 million influencer mansion in Alpharetta," I stated, watching her eyes track the papers falling to the ground. "The one you claim you and Trayvon bought with your brilliant real estate investments." I tossed a second folder. It landed heavily near her expensive heels. "Those are the repossession orders for the 2 matching Mercedes G-Wagons currently sitting in your driveway. The ones you post videos of every single day, claiming you paid cash for them." I threw the final, thickest folder. It hit the floor with a loud thud, scattering financial statements and legal contracts. "And those," I continued, my voice echoing in the silent room, "are the default notices on the personal loans that funded your trips to Bora. Bora, your designer wardrobes, and those diamond rings you are wearing right now." Keisha stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Trayvon rushed over, picking up the foreclosure notice. His eyes scanned the document, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. This is impossible," Trayvon stammered. His bravado was completely gone. The mortgage company said we had an extension. They said the LLC that holds the debt approved a forbearance. I smiled, a slow, calculated movement. That was the beauty of my profession. I tracked money. I knew exactly how it moved, where it hid, and who truly owned it. The LLC that holds the debt on your house, the loans on your cars, and the personal lines of credit that fund your entire fake life is called Apex Holdings, I explained smoothly. Did you ever bother to look up who actually owns Apex Holdings, Trayvon? Because if you had, you would have seen my signature on the incorporation documents. Keisha gasped, taking a step backward. She looked at me as if she had just seen a ghost. I wholly own Apex Holdings. I revealed, letting the magnitude of the statement sink in. I am your primary creditor. I am the one who approved your loans because I needed to see exactly how much debt you two were willing to drown yourselves in to maintain your little facade. And I am the one who just revoked the forbearance. Trayvon dropped the papers. His hands were shaking. You set us up. You set yourselves up, I corrected him. You chose to live a lie. I just financed it. And now I am collecting. I checked my watch, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. The eviction notice on your mansion goes into effect at exactly midnight tonight, I informed them coldly. The repo men are already en route to collect the G-Wagons. By tomorrow morning, you will not have a house, you will not have cars, and your 2 million followers will see the very public bankruptcy filings I submitted to the courts this afternoon. You are officially homeless, Keisha. I suggest you start packing your bags instead of recording videos. Keisha let out a choked sob. She dropped her phone, the threat of exposing me entirely forgotten. Her glamorous, untouchable world had been instantly vaporized. She looked at Trayvon, her eyes wide with panic. Trayvon, do something, Keisha shrieked, grabbing his arm. Tell her she cannot do this. Tell Darius to fix it. Trayvon spun around, looking desperately at Darius. The panic had stripped away his usual swagger. He was just a terrified man looking for a bailout. Darius, man, you have to help us, Trayvon pleaded. His voice cracked. You said the family trust was secure. You said we had millions in the primary accounts. Just transfer the funds and pay off the LLC. We cannot lose the house. Darius still holding. Jamal tried to pull himself together. He tried to project the image of the confident, capable older brother, the man who handled the family's vast wealth. He adjusted his stance, trying to look imposing. Do not worry, Trayvon, Darius said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. I handle the family trust. I manage the accounts. I will initiate a wire transfer first thing in the morning. We have more than enough liquidity to cover your debts. Sienna is just trying to scare you. She cannot touch the trust money. I control it. I could not help it. I laughed. It was not a warm or humorous sound. It was a dark, bone-chilling laugh that cut through the tension in the room and made Darius flinch. I had waited 7 years for this moment. I had endured their condescension, their insults and their arrogance, all while meticulously tracking every single financial transaction this family had ever made. Are you sure about that, Darius? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. Are you absolutely certain you control the family trust? Darius swallowed hard. He looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized that the woman standing before him was not the naive, compliant wife he thought he knew. He was looking at a woman who held all the cards, and he had no idea what hand I was about to play. Darius swallowed hard. He looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized that the woman standing before him was not the naive, compliant wife he thought he knew. He was looking at a woman who held all the cards, and he had no idea what hand I was about to play. The panic in the room was palpable, but Darius was a man who had spent his entire life failing upward. He had always relied on his athletic charm and his mother's immense wealth to bully his way out of consequences. When faced with absolute destruction, his fragile ego demanded that he reclaim control. He forcefully handed our crying son over to Keisha, who was still kneeling on the floor, frantically sorting through the foreclosure documents I had thrown at her. Jamal reached for me, his small face red with tears, but Keisha held him back awkwardly. Darius squared his broad shoulders, puffing out his chest, as he took slow, heavy, deliberate steps toward me. He was trying to use his height and his physical presence to intimidate me, a classic tactic of a weak man backed into a corner. He stopped just inches from my face, invading my personal space, attempting to force me to step backward. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders relaxed, meeting his furious gaze with absolute chilling indifference. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour smell of nervous sweat. "Listen to me very carefully," Sienna Darius growled, lowering his voice into a pathetic attempt at a menacing whisper. "You think you are running things because you froze a few credit cards. You think you have somehow outsmarted us with your little accounting tricks. But you are just a freelance bookkeeper playing a high-stakes game you simply do not understand. I saw this coming. I knew you were losing your mind, so I took the necessary precautions to protect my son and my assets." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my cheek, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. I smiled internally, knowing exactly what arrogant confession he was about to deliver. "I already moved the money," Sienna Darius boasted, a cruel, victorious smirk returning to his handsome face. "Every single dime from Jamal's college fund, all of your personal savings, the joint checking accounts you thought were completely safe. I executed the wire transfers 3 days ago. It is all sitting in an offshore account under a secure corporate umbrella that you cannot possibly touch. You have nothing. You are broke, you are crazy, and in 5 minutes the paramedics are going to drag you out of here and lock you in a padded room while I spend every cent of your hard-earned money. Now be a good little victim and wait for the ambulance." I looked at the man I had married 7 years ago. I looked at the utter blinding arrogance radiating from his pores. He truly believed he had outmaneuvered a federal financial investigator. He genuinely believed his sloppy amateur wire transfers to a shell company in the Cayman Islands were untraceable. He thought his basic banking maneuvers were invisible to a woman who dismantled international money laundering syndicates before lunch. I did not argue with him. I did not scream or demand my money back. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my tailored trench coat and pulled out the slim silver remote for the 80-inch flat-screen television mounted above our grand marble fireplace. I pressed a single button. The massive screen flickered to life, illuminating the dimming living room with a bright blue glow. I tapped my encrypted smartphone, immediately casting my secure tablet interface directly to the display. "You talk a lot about protecting assets, Darius," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the tense room. "But you are remarkably bad at protecting your own dirty secrets. Let us take a close look at where that offshore money really goes." The first high-definition photograph flashed onto the massive screen. It was a crisp, clear security image of Darius wearing a black baseball cap and dark sunglasses, slipping nervously through the VIP back entrance of a notorious underground casino in downtown Atlanta. The digital timestamp glowing in the bottom right corner showed it was taken at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, the exact night he had sworn to me he was in Chicago attending a prestigious wealth management conference. Darius froze. His smug expression vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He took a quick, stumbling step back from me, his eyes glued to the glowing screen. The next photograph appeared. This one showed Darius sitting at a high-stakes poker table. The camera angle perfectly captured his panicked, sweating face as a casino dealer swept away a massive pile of chips. The digital overlay on the image indicated the exact amount of his loss that single night. It was a staggering sum, easily enough to buy a modest home in the suburbs. "What is this?" Valerie demanded, her voice sharp with sudden piercing alarm. "Darius, what is she showing us?" What casino is that? Darius could not answer. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he watched his carefully constructed life of black excellence burn to the ground in high definition. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. I clicked to the next image. The entire room gasped in unison. It was a photograph of Darius walking into the dimly lit lobby of a luxury boutique hotel on the edge of the city. He was not alone. His arm was wrapped intimately around the waist of a stunning tall woman wearing a tight red cocktail dress. It was not just any random woman. It was Monica, the highly respected vice president of Valerie's heavily publicized philanthropic foundation. The very same woman Valerie praised constantly at her exclusive charity galas. The same woman who was supposedly a trusted, loyal family friend. Keisha let out a loud, dramatic squeal, covering her mouth with both hands. Trayvon stared at the screen, his eyes wide with absolute shock, his jaw hanging open. Valerie's face turned an unhealthy, chalky shade of ashen gray. She looked from the giant screen to her son, her chest rising and falling with heavy disbelief. "You see, Darius," I announced, turning to face him, fully refusing to let him look away from his own destruction. "I know exactly where Jamal's college fund went. I know exactly where my personal savings went. They did not go to a secure offshore safety net to protect our son. They went directly into the pockets of the violent loan sharks you have been running from for the last 14 months. You are not a brilliant wealth manager. You are a degenerate, desperate gambler drowning in massive debt." Darius dropped heavily to his knees. He looked like a man who had just sustained a fatal wound. He raised his hands, shaking violently, trying to formulate an excuse that simply did not exist. "Sienna, please," Darius begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "I can explain everything. It was a terrible mistake. I was going to win it all back. I swear I was going to fix it before you found out." I ignored his pathetic pleading completely. I turned my attention to Valerie, who was still staring fixatedly at the photograph of her son and her foundation's vice president walking into a hotel room. She was practically vibrating with rage, but she had not yet realized the true depth of the betrayal. "But that is not even the best part, Valerie," I said, my voice turning razor-sharp and commanding the room. "Did you honestly think your mediocre son could fund a high-stakes gambling addiction on my modest savings alone? My money barely covered the weekly interest he owed to those dangerous men. He needed a much bigger payout to keep them from breaking his legs." I clicked the remote one last time. A highly detailed financial spreadsheet appeared on the screen, replacing the hotel photograph. It highlighted a complex series of staggered hidden wire transfers executed over the past 6 months. Red arrows pointed from one account to another, tracing a very clear path of stolen funds. "Take a very close look at those routing numbers, Valerie," I instructed coldly. "Your precious, perfect son did not just cheat on me with your vice president. He colluded with her. Together they forged your signature and embezzled exactly $800,000 directly from your untouchable charity foundation. He systematically drained the community outreach fund to pay off the men who were threatening his life." The silence in the living room was absolute and terrifying. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a massive, deadly explosion. Valerie stepped closer to the television, staring intensely at the spreadsheet. She recognized the specific account numbers. She recognized the transaction dates. The devastating reality of what her golden boy had done finally crashed into her like a physical blow. He had not just ruined his marriage with his infidelity. He had compromised the one thing Valerie cared about more than anything else in the entire world. He had jeopardized her pristine reputation, her immense wealth, and her elite social standing in Atlanta. Valerie's face transformed completely. The sophisticated, untouchable matriarch disappeared, replaced by a monster. Her skin turned a deep, furious shade of purple. The veins in her neck bulged visibly against her expensive pearl necklace. She did not look at Darius with the sorrow or disappointment of a mother whose son had destroyed his own family. She looked at him with the pure, unadulterated hatred of a narcissist whose primary source of power had just been violently stolen. $800,000! Valerie screamed at the top of her lungs. The deafening sound tore through the house, shattering any remaining illusion of their perfect, refined family. "You stole from my foundation. You stole from me." Suddenly, the entire room erupted into absolute madness. Valerie lunged forward at Darius, slapping him across the face so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Darius cowered on the marble floor, trying desperately to shield his face while sobbing uncontrollably. Keisha started screaming wildly at Trayvon, demanding to know if he knew about the stolen money, realizing that her own financial bailout was now completely and utterly impossible. Trayvon shouted back, pushing Keisha away and aggressively cursing at his brother for ruining them all. The polished upper-class facade had completely vaporized into thin air. They were tearing each other apart like wild animals fighting over a scrap of meat, blinded by their own greed and sudden ruin. I stood in the center of the utter chaos, perfectly still, perfectly calm. I watched them scream. I watched them turn on each other with vicious primal rage. They were completely distracted by the stolen money, the shocking betrayal, and their shattered egos. In their furious panic, they had entirely forgotten about the fake doctor, the signed psychiatric hold, and the grand wicked plan to lock me away forever. They thought they had won. They thought I was finished. But they were wrong. I had not forgotten any of it. I simply stood there in the beautiful, echoing foyer and waited for the perfect moment to deliver the final crushing blow that would end them. The living room had become a battlefield of shattered egos and exposed crimes. Valerie's furious slap had left a bright red mark across Darius's cheek, but it had not silenced the chaos. Keisha and Trayvon were still screaming at him, demanding to know how he could have been so stupid, how he could have ruined their perfect debt-financed lives. Darius, curled on the marble floor, was sobbing uncontrollably, the facade of the confident wealth manager completely destroyed. Valerie, however, was a different breed of predator. She did not crumble under the weight of her son's betrayal. She adapted. She drew herself up to her full height, smoothing the wrinkles from her emerald green silk suit. The initial shock of the embezzled charity funds had passed, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. She turned her back on her sobbing son and locked her eyes on me. "Enough!" Valerie commanded, her voice slicing through the cacophony. The sheer authority in her tone forced Keisha and Trayvon into stunned silence. Even Darius quieted his sobs, looking up at his mother with wide, terrified eyes. "You think you have won, Sienna?" Valerie sneered, stepping gracefully over the scattered foreclosure documents. "You think exposing Darius's pathetic little gambling problem changes anything? He is weak. He has always been weak. But I am not. And you are still a delusional, unstable woman who is about to be committed to a psychiatric ward." I watched her closely, admiring her sheer audacity. She was standing in the middle of a room filled with undeniable proof of massive financial fraud, and she was still trying to play the role of the untouchable matriarch. "The ambulance is still coming, Sienna," Valerie continued, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "And Arthur's little licensing issue doesn't matter. The 5150 form is signed. The hospital intake director is a personal friend of mine. Once you are in that ambulance, you are gone. And when you are gone, none of this matters." She gestured dismissively toward the massive television screen, which still displayed the detailed spreadsheet of Darius's embezzlement. "You really do not understand how our world works, do you?" Valerie mocked. "You think a missing $800,000 is going to ruin me? I can cover that shortfall with a single phone call to one of my board members. I can bury Darius's indiscretions before the morning paper is printed. But I cannot do any of that if you are standing here waving your little tablet around." She took another step closer to me, her eyes gleaming with a manic, desperate energy. The truth was finally bubbling to the surface. She was no longer hiding behind the excuse of wanting to get me help. She was revealing her true motive. "I orchestrated this entire night, Sienna," Valerie confessed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I paid Arthur. I arranged the transport. I convinced Darius to play along. I did all of this because I need you out of the way. I need you declared legally incompetent." "Why?" I asked, my voice flat, encouraging her to keep talking, to keep confessing. "Why go to such extreme lengths just to get rid of me?" Valerie laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated greed. "Because of your father, you stupid girl," Valerie spat out. "Because of that absurd $10 million trust fund he left you." I did not flinch, but internally, the pieces finally clicked into place. My father had been a successful, self-made entrepreneur. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left a substantial trust fund in my name. The details of the trust were extremely private, but I knew the stipulations. I knew the clauses he had put in place to protect me. "Did you really think I didn't know about it?" Valerie gloated. "Darius told me everything. He told me about the $10 million sitting in that account collecting interest, while we struggled to maintain our lifestyle. But he also told me about the morality and competency clause your paranoid father insisted on including." She paced back and forth, energized by her own perceived brilliance. "Your father was a fool, but he was a careful fool," Valerie continued. "He stipulated that if you were ever declared legally incompetent, or committed to a psychiatric facility for more than 72 hours. The control of the trust would automatically transfer to your legal spouse to manage on behalf of your child. It was designed to protect the money if you ever lost your mind. Valerie stopped pacing and pointed a sharp manicured finger at my chest. "And you have lost your mind, Sienna," Valerie declared triumphantly. "The paperwork says so. The doctor said so. Once you are locked in Oak Ridge, Darius takes control of the $10 million. We pay back the charity. We pay off Trayvon and Keisha's ridiculous debts. We secure our status in the Black Elite forever. And you get to spend the rest of your life drugged out of your mind in a very comfortable, very expensive padded cell." The sheer evil of her plan was staggering. She was willing to destroy my life, strip me of my child, and lock me in a psychiatric ward just to steal my father's money to cover her family's debts and maintain their facade of wealth. She was a monster hiding behind a pearl necklace and a charity title. "You really thought of everything," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I always do," Valerie smirked. She turned to the foyer, expecting to see the doctor she had hired. "Arthur, get in here and sedate her. The ambulance will be here any minute." She had been so consumed by her own grand confession that she hadn't noticed Dr. Vance's abrupt departure earlier. She had been too busy tearing into Darius to see the fake doctor flee into the night. "Arthur!" Valerie called out again, her voice rising in frustration. She walked into the foyer, looking around the empty space. "Where did he go, Trayvon? Where is the doctor?" Trayvon, still clutching the foreclosure notices, looked up with wide, terrified eyes. "He ran, Mom. He took off when Sienna started talking about his medical license." Valerie's face contorted in disbelief. "He ran. He cannot run. I paid him $50,000. She stormed back into the living room, her composure finally beginning to crack. She looked at Darius, still cowering on the floor, then at Keisha, who was quietly sobbing. The realization that her carefully constructed plan was unraveling was starting to set in. "Fine," Valerie snapped, marching toward a decorative cabinet near the fireplace. "If you are all too useless to handle this, I will do it myself." She opened the cabinet and pulled out a small black medical bag. I recognized it immediately. It was the bag Arthur Vance had left behind in his panic. Valerie ripped the bag open and pulled out a pre-filled syringe. The clear liquid inside caught the light of the chandelier. "You are going to Oak Ridge, Sienna," Valerie growled, gripping the syringe tightly. "Even if I have to put you to sleep myself. No one will question a wealthy, respected matriarch over a raving, sedated woman. I will tell the paramedics you had a violent episode." She took a step toward me, raising the syringe. Darius gasped, finally finding his voice. "Mom, don't, that's assault." "Shut up, Darius," Valerie screamed. "I am saving this family. I am saving our legacy." She lunged forward, her eyes wild, the syringe aimed at my arm. I did not move. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a sleek black encrypted hard drive. I held it up between us, perfectly steady. "You really should have checked the smoke detectors in this house, Valerie," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room. Valerie stopped inches from me. The tip of the syringe hovered near my shoulder. She stared at the small black device in my hand, her manic expression faltering. "What is that?" she demanded, her breathing heavy. "What are you talking about?" "This," I said, tapping the hard drive lightly, "is the culmination of a 6-month federal investigation into your specific brand of madness. And the smoke detectors you so carefully ignored are currently housing high-definition audio-enabled hidden cameras." I watched the blood drain from Valerie's face. The syringe in her hand began to tremble. "Every single word you just said," I continued smoothly, "every admission of fraud, every detail of your plan to illegally commit me and steal my father's trust fund has been recorded, encrypted, and automatically uploaded to a secure server at the IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office downtown." Valerie took a slow, shaky step backward. She lowered the syringe, her eyes darting from the hard drive in my hand to the ceiling, searching for the hidden cameras she suddenly realized were watching her every move. The hunter had just realized she was the prey. The silence that followed was suffocating. Valerie stared at the small, encrypted hard drive in my hand, her mind racing to process the implications of what I had just said. The syringe, still clutched tightly in her manicured hand, wavered slightly. She was a woman accustomed to control, to scripting reality, and forcing everyone else to play their parts. Now she was staring at irrefutable digital proof that her entire performance had been captured. Hidden cameras! Valerie scoffed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. You are lying, Sienna. You do not have the technical capability or the intelligence to orchestrate something like that. You are right about one thing, Valerie. I said, my tone flat and uncompromising. I am not a tech genius. I am a forensic financial investigator. But when you work for the federal government, you tend to make friends in the IT department. And when you realize your own husband and mother-in-law are trying to drug you into an institution, you ask for a favor. I slowly walked past her, ignoring the needle she still held. I moved toward the massive television screen, picking up the remote once again. Let us review the tape, shall we? I asked. I think Darius might enjoy this part. I pressed a button on the tablet, accessing the secure cloud server where the footage was stored. The spreadsheet of Darius's embezzlement vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear wide-angle view of our pristine marble countertop kitchen. The digital timestamp indicated the recording was from exactly 2 weeks ago at 6 in the morning. The high-definition video showed Darius dressed in his expensive workout gear standing near the coffee maker. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes darting toward the hallway, ensuring he was alone. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unlabeled plastic bottle. He opened a capsule and poured a heavy dose of white powder into my favorite coffee mug. A collective gasp echoed through the living room. Keisha clapped her hand over her mouth. Trayvon muttered a harsh expletive. Darius, still kneeling on the floor, watched the screen with wide, horrified eyes. That is lorazepam. I explained, my voice chillingly calm as the video continued to play. A powerful, fast-acting sedative. You were crushing up heavy doses and mixing it into my morning coffee. You wanted me sluggish. You wanted me confused. You wanted my coworkers to notice that my cognitive functions were slipping. The video shifted to another angle this time, capturing the hallway outside my home office. It showed Valerie dressed in one of her signature silk suits, quietly slipping out of my office, holding a thick stack of manila folders. She paused near the entryway, pulled my car keys from the hook, and deliberately dropped them behind the heavy oak console table. And there you are, Valerie, I noted, pointing at the screen, stealing my work files and hiding my keys. Then an hour later you would sit in this very living room and tell me that my memory was failing, that I was misplacing things, that I was losing my grip on reality. You spent 6 months meticulously gaslighting me, trying to build a documented history of mental instability. I turned to face them, my expression hardening into a mask of pure, unrelenting resolve. You tried to convince a sane woman that she was crazy, I said, the venom finally bleeding into my voice. You drugged me in my own home. You manipulated my environment to make me doubt my own mind. And you did it all so you could steal a $10 million trust fund and cover up Darius's massive, unforgivable embezzlement from your precious charity. Valerie dropped the syringe. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. The realization that she was no longer in control, that her entire criminal conspiracy had been exposed and recorded, finally broke her. Sienna, Valerie stammered, taking a hesitant step toward me. Her voice had lost all its authority. It was now a desperate, pleading whisper. Please, we can fix this. We can explain everything. I was just trying to protect the family. You have to understand. Protect the family, I countered, my voice laced with disgust. You do not care about this family, Valerie. You care about your image. You care about the charity galas, the country club memberships, and the illusion of black excellence you sell to the community. You were willing to destroy my life and traumatize my son just to keep the money flowing. There is no fixing this. I watched as the remaining color drained from Valerie's face. The mighty matriarch, the untouchable queen of Atlanta's elite society, was unraveling right in front of me. She looked desperately at Darius, but he was still cowering on the floor, paralyzed by fear and shame. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently. Someone was trying the handle, realizing it was locked from the outside. It was Dr. Arthur Vance. The fake doctor had tried to flee, only to discover that I had anticipated his cowardice. I had locked the deadbolt and engaged the security system from my tablet the moment he turned his back. "Let me out," Arthur yelled, pounding his fists against the heavy mahogany door. "I did not know about this. I was just paid for an assessment. Let me out of here. I walked slowly toward the foyer, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the floor. Arthur spun around, his face pale and slick with sweat. He pressed his back against the door, looking at me like I was a predator. "You realize what you have done, Arthur?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "You did not just sign a fraudulent psychiatric hold. You entered into a conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder by participating in a scheme involving the illegal administration of heavy sedatives." Arthur shook his head violently, his eyes wide with panic. "No, I didn't know about the drugs. I swear I just signed the paper. Trayvon paid me $10,000 to sign the paper. I didn't know they were poisoning you." I turned my head, slightly locking eyes with Trayvon, who was still standing near the couch, clutching the foreclosure notices. Trayvon's bravado had completely vanished. He looked like a terrified child. $10,000? I asked Trayvon, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what my freedom is worth to you? You were willing to lock your sister-in-law in a psychiatric ward for 10 grand. Trayvon swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked at Keisha, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and realization. "Sienna, look," Trayvon stammered, taking a hesitant step forward. We didn't know the whole plan. We didn't know about the drugs or the trust fund. Valerie just told us you were sick and needed help. We were just trying to help." "Do not lie to me, Trayvon," I snapped. "I have the text messages between you and Darius discussing the payment to Arthur. You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted me out of the way just as much as Valerie did, because you thought Darius would bail you out of your massive debt." Keisha suddenly pushed past Trayvon, her designer dress swishing as she moved. She stopped a few feet away from me, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. The arrogant, condescending influencer had disappeared, replaced by a desperate woman trying to save her own skin. "Sienna, please," Keisha begged, her voice trembling. "We had nothing to do with the embezzlement or the drugs. We swear. We will testify against Valerie and Darius. We will tell the police everything. Just please do not send the repo men to our house. Please do not take our cars. We will do whatever you want. We will sign whatever you want. Just give us a plea deal." I looked at Keisha, a woman who mere minutes ago had called me a low-level stain on their elite family. She had mocked my background, insulted my intelligence, and cheered at the prospect of my institutionalization. Now she was offering to sell out her own husband's family for a chance to keep her fake influencer lifestyle intact. It was pathetic. It was the absolute lowest form of cowardice. I stared into her desperate, pleading eyes, feeling nothing but cold, clinical detachment. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You are 20 minutes too late for a plea deal, Keisha," I said, my voice dead and uncompromising. "You made your choice when you walked through that door with a champagne glass ready to celebrate my destruction. You chose the wrong side." Keisha let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. Trayvon grabbed her arm, pulling her back, realizing that negotiating with me was completely futile. They were trapped. They were all trapped. Valerie, who had been standing silently near the television, finally snapped out of her shock. Her survival instinct kicked in. She could not accept defeat. She could not accept that a working-class woman had completely dismantled her empire. "You think this is over?" Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think a hidden camera and a frozen credit card mean you have won? I still have power in this city. Sienna, I have lawyers who will tie you up in court for decades. I have connections who will ensure you never work in finance again. You cannot prove any of this without a proper investigation." I did not respond. I simply turned my head slightly, listening intently. A faint, high-pitched wail was building in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy sirens echoing down the affluent, tree-lined streets of Buckhead. Valerie heard it too. A sudden manic smile broke across her face. The sirens were getting closer, the flashing lights beginning to reflect against the massive living room windows. "Do you hear that, Sienna?" Valerie gloated, her chest puffing out with renewed, arrogant confidence. "That is the medical transport, and they are bringing my private security detail with them. You can show them all the videos you want, but they work for me. They will strap you to a gurney and take you away, and I will personally oversee your commitment." Valerie walked over to Darius and snatched Jamal from his arms. She held my crying son tightly, looking at me with pure, unadulterated malice. Say goodbye to your crazy mommy, Jamal. Valerie sneered, her voice dripping with venom. The men in white coats are here. The distant wail of sirens cut through the tense, suffocating silence of the living room. The sound was faint at first, a high-pitched hum, barely registering above the collective shock radiating from Valerie, Darius, Keisha, and Trayvon. But within seconds, the noise amplified, growing heavier and more urgent, echoing down the pristine tree-lined streets of Buckhead. Valerie's head snapped toward the massive front windows. The first flashes of red and blue light began to reflect against the glass, painting her pale, terrified face in harsh, rhythmic strobes. For a fleeting second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes as she stared at the encrypted hard drive in my hand, processing the reality that she had just confessed to multiple federal crimes on hidden cameras. But Valerie was a narcissist, and narcissists do not surrender. They double down. They twist reality until it fits their delusion of absolute control. Suddenly, Valerie burst into a loud, manic laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a triumphant, psychotic cackle that sent a chill down my spine. The fear evaporated from her posture, replaced by a terrifying, arrogant certainty. She dropped the syringe onto the coffee table and wiped a tear of mirth from her eye. You really thought you had me, didn't you, Sienna? Valerie gloated, her voice ringing with renewed authority. She stepped away from me, moving toward the foyer as the sirens grew deafening outside our front door. You really thought a little hidden camera trick was going to save you. You are so naive, so hopelessly, pathetically naive. She turned back to face the room, spreading her arms wide, gesturing toward the flashing lights outside. Do you hear that? Valerie demanded, looking from Trayvon to Keisha to Darius. That is not your little IRS task force, Sienna. That is the private medical transport I hired, and they are bringing my personal contacts from the Atlanta Police Department with them. You see, when you operate at my level, you don't just hire a doctor, you ensure the entire system works for you. Darius, still kneeling on the floor, looked up with a glimmer of desperate hope. Keisha stopped sobbing, her eyes darting toward the front door. Trayvon swallowed hard, slowly backing away from me, choosing to align himself with the matriarch once again. They were sheep flocking back to the perceived safety of Valerie's wealth and influence. Valerie strutted back toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She stopped inches away, her face twisting into a mask of pure cruelty. I have police captains on my charity's payroll, Valerie sneered, lowering her voice so only I could hear. I fund the re-election campaigns of the judges who sign committal orders. You think they are going to walk in here and arrest a pillar of the black elite community based on a USB drive held by a hysterical, paranoid woman? They are going to take one look at you. Look at the 5150 form Arthur signed, and they are going to strap you to a gurney. I am going to personally hand them the hard drive, and they will conveniently lose it as evidence. You have absolutely no power here, Sienna. She did not wait for my response. Valerie spun around and walked directly toward Darius, who was still holding Jamal tightly against his chest. My son was crying silently now, his small body trembling as he watched his grandmother's erratic, terrifying behavior. Valerie reached down and grabbed Jamal by the arm, roughly pulling him away from his father. Darius offered a weak, pathetic protest, but he let his son go, too cowardly to defy his mother. Come here, Jamal, Valerie cooed, though her grip was tight and possessive. She held my son in front of her, like a shield, turning him to face me. Say goodbye to your crazy mommy. The men in white coats are here to take her away. She is very sick, Jamal, but Grandma is going to take good care of you now. Jamal let out a loud, heartbroken wail, reaching his small hands toward me. Mommy, Mommy, please. Something cold and primal snapped inside me. The calculated, detached demeanor of the federal investigator vanished, instantly replaced by the raw, unstoppable fury of a mother protecting her child. I did not care about the flashing lights outside. I did not care about the federal raid I had meticulously planned. I only cared about removing my son from the grip of a monster. I closed the distance between us in 3 rapid, silent strides. Valerie barely had time to register my movement before I was standing directly in front of her. I did not scream. I did not strike her. I simply reached out, clamped my hands firmly around Jamal's waist, and ripped him out of Valerie's grip with a terrifying, absolute authority. The sheer physical force and precision of the movement caught her completely off guard. She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the edge of the Persian rug, nearly falling over. "Do not ever!" I hissed, my voice dropping to a low, deadly rumble that vibrated through the silent room. "Put your hands on my son again!" Valerie gasped, her eyes wide with sudden fear. She had finally pushed me too far, and she realized instantly that she had awakened something dangerous. I pulled Jamal tightly against my chest, feeling his small heart racing against mine. I kissed the top of his head, murmuring soothing words into his ear. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones I had packed specifically for this moment. I carefully placed them over his ears, adjusting them until they fit snugly. "Put these on, baby," I whispered softly, kissing his cheek one last time. "Mommy's at work now. Just close your eyes and hold on tight." Jamal nodded, burying his face in my neck, the headphones blocking out the chaos of the room and the blaring sirens outside. I turned my attention back to the door, my posture rigid, my eyes locked on the entryway. The sirens had stopped, replaced by the sounds of heavy, synchronized footsteps marching up my driveway. I could hear the crunch of gravel, the sharp, clipped commands of men coordinating a tactical approach. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the living room in a chaotic, disorienting strobe effect. Valerie scrambled to her feet, adjusting her suit, trying desperately to regain her composure. She looked at Darius and the others, her face a mask of panicked determination. "Stay calm, all of you," Valerie ordered, her voice shrill. "Let me handle this. Remember, she is the one who is crazy. She attacked me. She snatched the child. Follow my lead." She marched toward the front door, preparing to greet the medical transport and her corrupt police contacts. She intended to play the role of the victimized, concerned matriarch one last time. She reached for the heavy brass handle, her chin held high, ready to deliver the performance of her life. Before her hand could even touch the metal, a heavy, rhythmic pounding shook the massive mahogany door. It was not a polite knock. It was the aggressive, commanding strike of a tactical battering ram preparing to breach. The sound rattled the windows and sent a physical vibration through the floorboards. Valerie froze, her hand suspended in midair. The arrogant smile finally slid off her face. That was not the knock of paramedics. That was not the knock of friendly, corrupt local police officers coming to do a favor for a wealthy donor. A voice boomed through a heavy-duty megaphone, the amplified sound shattering the quiet of the affluent neighborhood and tearing through the thick walls of the house. The voice was deep, authoritative, and absolutely uncompromising. It did not say paramedics. It did not say Atlanta police. The voice boomed, "Federal agents, open the door. We have a warrant. Open the door immediately, or we will breach." The color violently drained from Valerie's face. She stumbled backward away from the door, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Keisha let out a high-pitched scream, dropping to her knees and covering her head. Trayvon backed away until he hit the wall, sliding down to the floor in pure terror. Darius remained paralyzed on the marble tile, his eyes wide and unblinking, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of his wife's power. I stood in the center of the living room, holding my son, watching the perfect, untouchable facade of the black elite crumble into absolute, irreversible ruin. The trap had officially snapped shut. The rhythmic pounding against the front door was deafening, vibrating through the floorboards and sending a physical shockwave through the room. The voice echoing through the megaphone had stripped away all the arrogant delusions Valerie had been clinging to. "Federal agents, we have a warrant. Open the door immediately, or we will breach." Valerie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat, her emerald silk suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a target. Her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic darted toward the windows, where the flashing red and blue lights seemed to mock her carefully constructed reality. Before anyone inside could react, the heavy mahogany front door shuddered violently. A loud, sharp crack echoed through the foyer as a tactical battering ram shattered the lock mechanism. The door swung open with explosive force, slamming against the interior wall, sending splinters of wood flying across the polished marble floor. Armed federal agents poured into the house. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. These were not local beat cops coming to do a favor for a wealthy donor. These were IRS criminal investigation special agents flanked by FBI tactical units wearing heavy tactical gear with bold yellow letters across their chests. Laser sights swept across the living room, cutting through the dim light, painting small red dots on the walls, the furniture, and the terrified occupants. The air was thick with tension and the sharp, clipped commands of agents securing the perimeter. "Hands where I can see them," a lead agent barked, sweeping his weapon across the room. "Nobody move." The fake doctor, Arthur Vance, who had been cowering in the foyer, let out a pathetic yelp. He immediately hit the floor, covering his head with his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. He didn't even try to run. The sheer presence of federal authority had broken him instantly. Keisha let out a high-pitched scream, dropping to her knees and covering her head, her designer dress bunching up awkwardly around her. Trayvon backed away until he hit the wall, sliding down to the floor in pure terror, his hands raised in surrender. Darius remained paralyzed on the marble tile, his eyes wide and unblinking, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of his wife's power. Valerie, however, could not comprehend the reality of the situation. Her narcissism, her deeply ingrained belief in her own invincibility, refused to let her surrender. She drew herself up, smoothing her suit, attempting to summon the authority she believed she still possessed. "What is the meaning of this?" Valerie shouted, stepping forward, her voice shrill and trembling. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Valerie Hastings. I am a pillar of the Atlanta community. I am a personal friend of the mayor. You cannot just barge into my home." She pointed a shaking finger at me. I was still standing in the center of the room, holding Jamal tightly against my chest, his noise-canceling headphones securely in place. "Arrest her!" Valerie demanded, her voice bordering on hysterical. "She is the one who is crazy. She is having a psychotic breakdown. She attacked me. She stole my grandson. I demand you arrest her immediately." The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with graying temples, ignored Valerie completely. He did not acknowledge her status, her wealth, or her desperate fabricated narrative. He holstered his weapon and walked straight past the screaming matriarch, his eyes locked on me. He stopped 3 feet away, his posture rigid and respectful. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a heavy black ballistic vest adorned with bold yellow letters, IRSCI. "Area Secured Special Agent Sienna," the lead agent said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. He held the vest out to me. "Ready for your orders." The color violently drained from Valerie, Darius, Keisha, and Trayvon's faces. The collective realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the muffled sobs of the fake doctor on the floor and the static crackle of the agent's radios. I slowly lowered Jamal to the ground, keeping him tucked safely behind my legs. I reached out and took the tactical vest from the lead agent. I slipped it over my tailored trench coat, the heavy material settling comfortably against my shoulders. I fastened the Velcro straps with slow, deliberate precision. I looked up, meeting the terrified, uncomprehending stares of my in-laws. I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the absolute destruction of their arrogant assumptions. "Surprise, mother," I said, my voice cold, authoritative, and echoing through the grand living room. "I don't do freelance taxes. I hunt financial terrorists. And you've been my primary target for 2 years." Valerie stumbled backward, opening and closing silently. The arrogant, untouchable queen of Atlanta's elite society had been entirely dismantled by the very woman she had spent 7 years trying to diminish. "Federal agent," Darius whispered, his voice cracking, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. You're a federal agent." "Senior special agent, actually," I corrected him, stepping forward, the tactical vest adding a layer of physical authority to my presence. "I specialize in high-net-worth financial fraud and complex money laundering schemes." "You really thought I was just crunching numbers for small businesses, Darius? You thought a woman who tracks international cartels wouldn't notice you moving $800,000 to a Cayman Islands shell company?" Darius shrank back, realizing that his sloppy financial maneuvers, his attempts to hide his gambling debts, and his arrogant belief that he had outsmarted me were not just foolish. They were federally prosecutable offenses. Valerie, still reeling from the shock, tried to cling to the last shreds of her delusion. She shook her head violently, refusing to accept the reality of her situation. "This is absurd," Valerie stammered, her voice shaking. This is a setup. You cannot do this. You have no proof. My charity is legitimate. We help the community. Your charity is a shell corporation, Valerie. I stated, my voice ringing with the clarity of undeniable facts. A very sophisticated, very well publicized shell corporation designed to launder millions of dollars for offshore entities. I have spent the last 24 months tracking every single dime that flowed through your accounts. I know about the kickbacks. I know about the falsified donor records. I know about the systematic embezzlement you orchestrated to maintain this ridiculous opulent lifestyle. I walked toward the coffee table, stepping over the foreclosure notices I had thrown at Keisha earlier. I picked up the encrypted hard drive I had shown Valerie minutes before the breach. And now, I said, holding the drive up, I have your recorded confession. I have audio and video evidence of you admitting to fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. Not to mention the little detail about you and your son crushing heavy sedatives into my coffee for 6 months. Valerie stared at the hard drive, the reality of her impending incarceration finally piercing through her narcissistic armor. The wealth, the status, the connections she had so desperately clung to were gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of federal charges. Keisha, still huddled on the floor, began to sob louder. She looked at Trayvon, who was staring blankly at the wall, completely defeated. They had traded their integrity for a fake influencer lifestyle, and now they were facing the brutal consequences of their complicity. The lead agent stepped forward, holding a thick stack of warrants. He began distributing them to the other agents, who immediately started moving through the house, executing the seizure orders. We have authorization to seize all assets connected to the fraudulent activities, the lead agent announced, his voice booming over the chaos. Tag everything. Agents began moving efficiently through the opulent living room, placing brightly colored seizure tags on the expensive artwork, the antique furniture, and the massive 80-inch television that had just displayed the evidence of their ruin. Darius watched in horror as an agent approached him, demanding he hand over the platinum watch he wore, explaining it was purchased with embezzled funds. Keisha screamed as another agent instructed her to remove the diamond rings she had flaunted on social media for years. The untouchable facade was not just crumbling, it was being meticulously, legally dismantled piece by stolen piece. The family that had built their identity on the illusion of wealth was being stripped of every tangible asset they possessed right in front of their eyes. And I was the one directing the operation. I stepped forward, my boots making a solid, grounded sound against the imported marble floor. The room, previously filled with the deafening shrieks of a family tearing itself apart, had fallen into a terrified, breathless hush. Valerie stood completely frozen. Her eyes darted wildly around the living room as men and women in tactical gear systematically took control of her entire universe. You thought you were a genius, Valerie, I began, my voice projecting across the vast space. Hosting those lavish galas, taking photos with local politicians, handing out oversized novelty checks to minority-owned businesses while wearing custom Chanel. It was a brilliant cover, the perfect camouflage for a predator. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. She looked at the lead agent, hoping for some sort of intervention, but he simply stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching me execute the takedown. I had spent 24 months meticulously building the community empowerment charity. I continued, circling her slowly like a shark inspecting wounded prey. The foundation you claim uplifts our people. It is nothing but a high-level, sophisticated shell corporation. You are not a philanthropist, Valerie. You are a professional money launderer, and you have been washing millions of dollars for offshore cartels. A sharp gasp escaped Keisha's lips. Trayvon stared at the floor, his entire body trembling violently. Darius let out a pathetic whimper, curling his knees to his chest. They had enjoyed the spoils of Valerie's empire, but hearing the actual words, hearing the federal designation of their lifestyle struck them with paralyzing terror. You took dirty, blood-soaked cash from international syndicates, I explained, ensuring every word landed with devastating impact. You funneled it through fake community grants, washed it through inflated real estate acquisitions, and cleaned it through dummy vendor invoices. You used the pain and struggle of marginalized communities as a shield to hide illicit cartel profits. You exploited our own people to line your pockets. It is the lowest, most despicable form of financial terrorism. That is a lie. Valerie hissed, her voice barely a whisper, her throat tight with panic. My books are clean. My accountants are the best in Atlanta. You have absolutely nothing. Your accountants have been cooperating with my task force for 3 weeks. I replied coldly. We flipped your chief financial officer last month. He handed over the secondary ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the encrypted communication logs. We have every wire transfer. We have every fake invoice. We know exactly how much dirty money you washed, and we know exactly where you hid the profits. I gestured around the opulent living room, sweeping my arm to encompass the sheer magnitude of their stolen wealth. You hid it right here, I stated. In the marble floors, in the crystal chandeliers, in the luxury vehicles parked in the driveway. You wore the evidence. You drove the evidence. You lived inside a mansion built entirely on federal crimes. As I spoke, the federal agents moved with ruthless, calculated efficiency. They were executing the asset forfeiture orders with surgical precision. 2 agents walked up to the massive 80-inch television that had just displayed Darius's gambling debts. They slapped a bright neon yellow seizure tag across the screen and immediately began unmounting it from the wall. Another agent approached the antique Persian rug Valerie was standing on. Step off the asset, ma'am, the agent commanded firmly. Valerie stumbled backward, watching in absolute horror as the agent rolled up the $50,000 rug and slapped a seizure tag on it. They tagged the custom velvet sofas. They tagged the imported Italian dining table. They tagged the original contemporary artwork hanging on the walls. The physical manifestation of their elite status was being stripped away piece by piece, catalogued as evidence of their sprawling criminal enterprise. Darius, still kneeling on the floor, watched an agent approach him. The agent did not draw a weapon. He simply pulled out a zip tie and a plastic evidence bag. The watch, the agent ordered, pointing to Darius's wrist. Darius looked down at the solid gold diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch his mother had bought him for his birthday. It was a symbol of his arrogant, unearned wealth. You cannot take this, Darius whimpered, holding his wrist against his chest. It was a gift. It is a personal item. It was purchased with funds traced directly to an illegal offshore wire transfer. I corrected him, stepping closer. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, any property derived from the proceeds of criminal activity is subject to immediate seizure. Take it off, Darius, or the agent will take it off for you. Trembling violently, Darius unclasped the heavy gold watch. The metal clinked loudly as he dropped it into the clear plastic evidence bag. The agent sealed the bag, slapped a neon tag on it, and moved on. Darius buried his face in his hands, finally realizing that the endless well of family money had completely dried up. I turned my attention to Keisha and Trayvon, the flashy, arrogant influencer couple who had spent the last 2 years mocking my wardrobe, my career, and my background. They had paraded their luxury lifestyle all over social media, boasting about their entrepreneurial success while quietly living off Valerie's laundered money. Keisha was hyperventilating. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest as if it were a life preserver. 2 female federal agents approached her holding open evidence bags. Ma'am, hand over the bag, the first agent instructed. No, Keisha shrieked, clutching the $30,000 Birkin bag tighter. This is mine. I bought this. I am a brand ambassador. You cannot take my things. Your brand makes 0 revenue, Keisha, I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical protests. We audited your LLC. You have never secured a single paying sponsorship. Every trip to Dubai, every designer outfit, every lease payment on your G-Wagon was funded by Trayvon, transferring dirty money from Valerie's fake charity into your corporate account. You are living on stolen funds. Give us the bag, the agent repeated, stepping closer. Keisha sobbed, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. She slowly handed over the Birkin bag. The agent dropped it into the evidence sack. Now the jewelry, the second agent commanded. The earrings, the necklace, the bracelets, all of it. Keisha let out a guttural scream of absolute humiliation. She had built her entire identity on these physical markers of wealth. As she unclasped her heavy diamond necklace and slid the massive glittering rings off her fingers, she was being stripped of her very identity. She dropped the jewelry into the bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the clasps. Without her stolen luxury goods, she was nothing but a fraud exposed in front of federal law enforcement. Trayvon tried to comfort her, reaching out to rub her shoulder. "Do not touch her," the lead agent barked. Two heavily armed agents flanked Trayvon. They grabbed him by the arms, roughly pulling him away from his wife. "What are you doing?" Trayvon shouted, panic lacing his voice as an agent kicked his legs apart to search him. "I didn't do anything, I just managed the books for my mother, I didn't know where the money came from." "You are a licensed accountant, Trayvon," I reminded him, stepping into his line of sight. "Ignorance is not a legal defense when you are the one pressing the button on international wire transfers. You knowingly routed illicit cartel funds through domestic shell companies. That makes you a key conspirator in a federal racketeering enterprise." The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. The agents ratcheted the steel cuffs tightly around Trayvon's wrists, pinning his arms behind his back. "Sienna, please," Trayvon begged, crying openly, as the agents patted him down. "I am your brother. I am your family. Please do not do this. I will give it all back. Just let me go." "You stopped being family the moment you paid a disgraced doctor to lock me in a psychiatric ward so you could steal my father's trust fund," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You made your bed, Trayvon. Now you get to sleep in a federal penitentiary." The agents marched Trayvon toward the front door. Keisha collapsed onto the floor, screaming her husband's name, surrounded by the flashing lights of the police cruisers parked outside. Valerie watched her empire burn. She watched her youngest son being dragged away in handcuffs. She watched her daughter-in-law stripped of her stolen dignity. She watched her eldest son cowering on the floor, stripped of his stolen wealth. Everything she had built, the entire foundation of her black elite status, had been meticulously annihilated in less than 10 minutes. But narcissists possess a terrifying, almost inhuman capacity for delusion. Even as her world collapsed into ash, Valerie refused to accept defeat. She refused to acknowledge that I had bested her. Her chest heaved, her eyes were bloodshot and wild. The sophisticated mask had melted away, leaving only the desperate cornered predator underneath. She squared her shoulders, summoning every last ounce of her false authority. She glared at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure venomous hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "You think you have won, you ungrateful little witch." Valerie spat out, her voice raw and ragged. "You think you can just march in here and destroy me? You are nothing. You are a street-level thug wearing a federal badge. I am Valerie Hastings. I built this city. I sit on the boards of institutions you cannot even afford to walk into." She was hyperventilating, struggling to draw breath, but she clung to her ego like a drowning woman clinging to a razor blade. "You can take the furniture," Valerie yelled, her voice echoing through the ruined foyer. "You can take the cars, but you cannot touch me. I own 40% of Oak Ridge Psychiatric Hospital. I am the largest shareholder in their medical network. My board members are the most powerful men in the state of Georgia. They will bury you in litigation. I have the best defense lawyers in the country on retainer. I will sue you. I will sue the federal government, and I will see you rot in a cell for this." She stepped closer, her eyes wide, spitting out her final, desperate threat. "You cannot touch me, Sienna, you hear me, you cannot touch me." I stood perfectly still, letting her scream, letting her exhaust the very last reserves of her delusional arrogance. I waited until her chest was heaving, until her voice cracked, until the absolute silence of the room settled around us once more. I looked at her with pure clinical detachment. Then I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out a freshly printed federal warrant. "Oak Ridge Psychiatric Hospital," I asked, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "Is that the institution you are banking your freedom on, Valerie?" "Oak Ridge Psychiatric Hospital," I asked, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. I pulled out a freshly printed federal warrant, the thick black ink contrasting sharply with the crisp white paper. I held it up, making sure Valerie could see the embossed seal of the United States District Court. "Is that the institution you are banking your freedom on, Valerie?" Valerie's chest heaved. She stared at the warrant, her eyes darting frantically from the document to my face. The sheer terrifying reality of her situation was beginning to set in. The arrogance that had fueled her entire life was sputtering out like a dying engine. "You mean the same Oak Ridge Psychiatric Hospital?" I continued pacing slowly toward her. That is currently being raided by my Alpha team across town. The same facility where your precious board members are at this very moment, being loaded into federal transport vehicles for systemic Medicare fraud and illegal kickbacks. A collective gasp echoed through the living room. Keisha whimpered, curling tighter into a ball on the floor. Trayvon, still pinned against the wall by the agents, closed his eyes in absolute defeat. Darius let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine, finally comprehending that there was no way out. The empire was not just falling, it was being eradicated. Valerie stumbled backward. Her hands shook violently. "No," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "No, you cannot. You do not have the authority. I am the lead investigator on the Oak Ridge Task Force," I replied, my voice slicing through her denial. "Did you honestly think I didn't know why you wanted to send me to that specific hospital? It wasn't just about silencing me or triggering the morality clause in my father's trust fund. You needed me sent to Oak Ridge because it is the central hub of your money laundering network." I took another step closer, forcing her to look into my eyes, forcing her to confront the woman she had systematically tried to destroy for the past 7 years. "I tapped their servers 3 months ago, Valerie." I revealed the truth, landing like a physical blow. "I know everything. I know how you used the stolen identities of heavily sedated, vulnerable patients to open fraudulent bank accounts. I know how you funneled your dirty cartel money through their non-existent medical expenses. You didn't just want to lock me away, you were planning to steal my identity and use my name to wash your illicit profits." "Lies," Valerie croaked, though her entire body was trembling. The veneer of the powerful, untouchable matriarch was completely gone. She was nothing more than a desperate criminal caught in her own trap. "The evidence is already secured," I stated, my tone unyielding. "My team seized the servers at 8:00 p.m. We have the internal emails between you and the hospital administrators discussing the false diagnoses. We have the wire transfers linking your charity directly to the fraudulent accounts. We even have the offshore routing numbers where you tried to hide the skimmed profits." I paused, letting the silence amplify the magnitude of her impending doom. The flashing red and blue lights outside seemed to mock her, illuminating the absolute ruin of her carefully constructed life. "You see, Valerie," I continued, "you made a fatal miscalculation. You assumed that because I came from a working-class background, because I didn't care about your country clubs or your designer labels, that I was stupid. You thought you could gaslight a forensic financial investigator. You thought you could outsmart the federal government." Valerie's knees buckled. The sheer weight of the evidence, the undeniable reality that her entire criminal network had been dismantled, finally crushed her. She collapsed onto the expensive hardwood floor, right next to the rolled-up Persian rug that an agent had just tagged for seizure. She did not look powerful. She did not look elite. She looked utterly broken. "Please," Valerie sobbed, the sound ripping from her throat. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a desperate, pathetic plea for self-preservation. "Sienna, please. I am Jamal's grandmother. I am your family. You cannot do this. I will give you anything. I will sign whatever you want. Just tell them to stop. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I stared down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no lingering sense of familial obligation. The woman sobbing at my feet was the same woman who had crushed sedatives into my coffee. The same woman who had tried to steal my son. The same woman who had planned to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life. "You have nothing left to give, Valerie," I said coldly. "And you were never my family." I turned to the lead agent who had been watching the exchange with professional detachment. "Take her," I ordered. 2 agents stepped forward. They hauled Valerie to her feet. She did not resist. She hung limply in their grasp, her eyes vacant, her spirit completely shattered. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly through the living room as they secured her wrists behind her back. "Sienna!" Darius screamed, crawling across the floor toward me. The sight of his mother in handcuffs had finally broken whatever pathetic resolve he had left. He grabbed the hem of my coat, his face slick with tears and snot. "Please, you have to help me. I didn't know how bad it was. She made me do it. She manipulated me." I looked down at the man I had married. The man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector. The man who had stood by while his mother poisoned me. The cowardice rolling off him was repulsive. "Get off me, Darius," I demanded, kicking my foot back to dislodge his grip. "Sienna, I am Jamal's father," Darius pleaded, sobbing uncontrollably. "You cannot send me to prison. Think about our son, he needs me." "He needs a father," I corrected him, my voice filled with disgust. "Not a degenerate gambler who embezzled from a charity to pay off loan sharks. Not a coward who agreed to drug his own wife to steal her inheritance." I signaled to another agent who stepped forward holding a sleek black folder. The agent handed it to me. I dropped the folder onto the floor right in front of Darius. "What is this?" Darius whimpered, staring at the folder as if it were a bomb. "That is your only way out of a 25-year federal sentence," I explained, my voice dropping to a low, uncompromising whisper. "Inside that folder are pre-signed divorce papers and a document granting me 100% sole legal and physical custody of Jamal with zero visitation rights for you." Darius stared at the folder, his eyes wide with horror. "You want me to sign away my son?" "You signed him away the moment you agreed to put me in a padded cell," I replied. "You have two choices, Darius. You sign those papers right now, or I add your name to the federal racketeering indictment. I have the wire transfers you authorized. I have the casino footage. I have enough evidence to ensure you don't see the outside of a federal penitentiary until Jamal is 30 years old." I pulled a pen from my pocket and tossed it onto the floor next to the folder. "Sign it," I commanded, "or I let the agents take you right now." Darius looked at the pen, then at me, then at the federal agent standing ready to arrest him. He was a coward, and cowards always choose self-preservation over everything else. He snatched the pen from the floor, his hands shaking violently as he opened the folder. He didn't even read the documents. He just signed his name on every marked line, weeping openly as he legally severed his ties to our son. He pushed the folder back toward me, his face buried in his hands. "I signed it," Darius sobbed. "I signed it. Please just let me go." I picked up the folder, checking the signatures. I tucked it safely into my vest. I looked at the pathetic man crying on the floor, feeling a profound sense of relief that he would never be a part of my life again. "Take him," I said to the agents. "Wait, you said you wouldn't arrest me!" Darius screamed as the agents hauled him to his feet. "You said I wouldn't go to prison. I said I wouldn't add your name to the federal racketeering indictment." I clarified, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are still being arrested for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and embezzlement. The state charges alone will put you away for a decade." The sharp click of handcuffs sounded again. Darius wailed, fighting weakly against the agent's grip, but it was useless. He was dragged toward the front door, sobbing hysterically. I turned back to the room. The opulent living room was a scene of absolute devastation. Seizure tags plastered every valuable item. Keisha was still crying quietly on the floor, her wrists also secured in zip ties. Trayvon was slumped against the wall, staring blankly ahead. Valerie stood between two agents, her head bowed, her legacy destroyed. "Get them out of my house," I ordered. The agents moved quickly, escorting the handcuffed family members toward the shattered front door. I picked Jamal up, adjusting his noise-canceling headphones, and followed them out onto the porch. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside the house. I looked down the long, manicured driveway. The scene playing out on the affluent Buckhead Street was the ultimate, inescapable consequence of their arrogance. Every wealthy, judgmental neighbor who had ever looked down on me, who had ever whispered about my working-class background, was standing on their immaculate lawns. They all had their phones out, recording the spectacle. The local news vans, tipped off by the FBI press office, had already arrived. The bright, glaring lights of the television cameras illuminated the driveway, capturing every humiliating second of the perp walk. The family that had worshipped their elite social image was being globally broadcast in handcuffs. The living room had transformed into a tableau of utter devastation. The heavy, syncopated rhythm of federal agents cataloging, tagging, and dismantling the Hastings family empire was the only sound left in the cavernous space. Keisha sat on the floor, her makeup running in thick black streaks, staring blankly at the empty spot on her wrist where her diamond bracelet had been. Trayvon stood handcuffed by the door, surrounded by heavily armed agents, his head bowed in a pathetic display of surrender. Valerie was silent, standing stiffly in federal custody, her eyes wide and vacant as she processed the obliteration of her status. But Darius had not accepted his fate. He was still kneeling on the marble floor, his tailored suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. The arrogant wealth manager who had confidently plotted my institutionalization just an hour ago had vanished. He was reduced to a sniveling, desperate shell of a man, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. His gaze locked onto me, standing near the fireplace in my IRS tactical vest, holding the black folder the agent had just handed me. He saw the cold, unyielding resolve in my expression, and he knew that his mother's influence could no longer protect him. Darius scrambled across the floor, the knees of his expensive trousers sliding against the imported marble. He stopped a few feet away from me, throwing his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender. "Sienna, please!" Darius wailed, tears streaming down his face, his voice cracking with panic. "You have to listen to me. I didn't want any of this. I swear to you, Sienna, I didn't want this." I stared down at him, my face a mask of stone. I let the silence hang, forcing him to stew in his own cowardice. "It was all her idea," Darius cried, pointing a trembling finger at Valerie. "She manipulated me. You know how she is, Sienna. She controls everything. She told me the charity was just facing a temporary shortfall. She said she needed the money to cover an audit. I didn't know she was laundering money for cartels. I swear on my life I didn't know." Valerie's head snapped up. Even in handcuffs, her pride flared. "You spineless coward!" she hissed, her voice venomous. "You were stealing from my foundation to pay off your gambling debts long before I involved you in the offshore accounts. Do not dare play the victim." "Shut up!" Darius screamed back at her, his voice bordering on hysterical. He turned back to me, clasping his hands together as if in prayer. "Sienna, she brainwashed me. She told me you were genuinely sick. She told me the sedatives were just supplements to help you calm down. She said the trust fund money was the only way to save the family. I was just trying to protect our family, Sienna. I was trying to protect you." I felt a surge of pure, visceral disgust. He was standing in a room surrounded by federal agents holding evidence of his embezzlement, his infidelity, and his active participation in drugging his wife, yet he was still trying to gaslight me. He was still trying to twist reality to cast himself as the reluctant hero. "Protect me," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through his pathetic sobs. "You drugged my coffee, Darius. You paid a disgraced doctor to forge a psychiatric hold. You stood by while your mother tried to rip my son from my arms. You were willing to lock me in a padded cell so you could steal my father's money to pay off the loan sharks who were threatening to break your legs." Darius flinched at the mention of the loan sharks. He realized I knew everything, every sordid detail of his hidden, desperate life. "I had no choice." Darius wept, crawling slightly closer. "They were going to hurt me, Sienna. They were going to hurt Jamal. I had to get the money. I had to." He reached out his hand, grasping the hem of my trench coat. He was using the ultimate manipulation tactic, the final desperate play of a cornered narcissist. He was trying to use our son. "Think about Jamal." Darius pleaded, his eyes wide, projecting an image of the devoted, heartbroken father. "You cannot send me to prison, Sienna. You cannot do that to our little boy. He needs his father. He loves me. How are you going to explain to him that his mommy put his daddy in a federal penitentiary? It will destroy him." My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. The absolute audacity to weaponize my child, the child he had been willing to traumatize just to secure his own financial survival, pushed me past the limits of human patience. I kicked my leg, dislodging his grip from my coat. "Do not ever," I said, my voice dropping an octave heavy with a dangerous, lethal authority, "invoke my son's name to save your own skin." I looked down at the pathetic creature sobbing on the floor. I had spent 6 years trying to mold him into a partner, trying to support his career, trying to ignore the red flags and the subtle manipulation. I had loved him. But the man I loved had never existed. He was a phantom, an illusion constructed by Valerie and sustained by Darius's own narcissism. I signaled the agent standing near the doorway. He nodded and took a step back, giving me the floor. I raised the sleek black folder I had been holding and tossed it onto the marble floor. It landed with a dull thud right between Darius's hands. "What? What is this?" Darius stammered, staring at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "That is your only way out of a 25-year federal sentence." I explained, my voice cold, precise, and devoid of any lingering affection. "And let me be perfectly clear, Darius, this is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum." Darius's hands shook violently as he reached out and slowly opened the folder. Inside were several crisp, legally binding documents meticulously prepared by my attorneys. The first document I instructed, dictating the terms of his surrender, is a pre-signed, uncontested divorce decree. You are waiving any and all claims to alimony, spousal support, or the division of assets. You get nothing, not a dime. Darius stared at the paper, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, his tears blurring the ink. "The second document," I continued, my voice echoing through the silent living room, "is a full, irrevocable surrender of your parental rights. It grants me 100% sole legal and physical custody of Jamal with zero visitation rights for you. You will never see him. You will never contact him. You will cease to exist in his life." Darius gasped, looking up at me in absolute horror. You want me to sign away my son? You want me to abandon my own child?" "You abandoned him the moment you handed over the psychiatric hold form to a fake doctor," I replied, showing absolutely no mercy. "You abandoned him when you decided his mother was an obstacle to be removed, rather than a partner to be protected. I am simply formalizing the choice you already made." Darius shook his head wildly, clutching the folder to his chest. "No, no, I cannot do this. I will not do this. He is my son. I have rights." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing him to tilt his head back to look at me. I towered over him, radiating the full authority of my federal badge and my unyielding maternal fury. "You have no rights." I stated, my tone final and absolute. "You have two choices, Darius. Option 1, you sign those papers right now, and I instruct the lead agent to drop the federal racketeering charges against you. You will still face state charges for embezzlement and conspiracy, but you might actually breathe free air again before Jamal graduates college." I paused, letting the weight of the alternative sink in. "Option 2, I continued, my voice sharp as a blade. "You refuse to sign, and I personally hand the United States Attorney the casino footage, the offshore wire transfers, carrying your digital signature, and the surveillance video of you poisoning my coffee. I add your name as a primary conspirator on the federal indictment, and you spend the next 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Your choice." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a heavy silver pen, and tossed it onto the floor next to the folder. "Sign it," I commanded. "Sign away all your rights right now, or I let the agents take you and you leave this house in handcuffs, facing a quarter of a century behind bars." Darius stared at the pen. He looked at me, searching for any hint of hesitation, any flicker of mercy. He found none. He looked at Valerie, who was shaking her head, disgusted by his display of weakness. He looked at the federal agents standing impassively around the room, their hands resting near their holstered weapons. I was a coward. And a coward will always, without fail, choose the path of least resistance. He will always choose self-preservation over principle, over loyalty, over his own flesh and blood. Darius let out a ragged, defeated sob. His shoulders slumped, the fight completely draining out of him. His hands trembled violently as he picked up the silver pen. I didn't read the documents. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just flipped through the pages, his tears splashing onto the crisp white paper, smudging the ink as he hastily scrawled his signature on every marked line. He was legally erasing himself from his son's life, trading his paternal rights for a lighter prison sentence. It was the ultimate defining act of his absolute cowardice. He finished the last signature and pushed the folder back toward me, his face buried in his hands. "I signed it." Darius wept, his voice muffled by his palms. "I signed it. Please just let me go. Get them out of my house." I ordered, my voice cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the room. The federal agents moved with swift, practiced efficiency. Two agents flanked Valerie, placing firm hands on her silk-clad shoulders, guiding her toward the shattered front door. Another team hauled Darius to his feet, ignoring his pathetic whimpers as they frog-marched him across the marble floor. Keisha and Trayvon followed their heads, bowed, the reality of their ruined lives finally settling over them like a physical weight. I bent down and scooped Jamal into my arms. He was surprisingly calm, the heavy noise-canceling headphones doing their job, isolating him from the terrifying sounds of his family's destruction. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his small arms wrapping tightly around me. I adjusted my tactical vest, took a deep breath of the air that suddenly felt lighter, and followed the procession out onto the front porch. The cool, crisp evening air of Buckhead hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension that had poisoned the inside of that mansion for years. I stepped out onto the expansive column-lined porch and looked down the long, meticulously manicured driveway. The scene unfolding before me was the ultimate inescapable consequence of their arrogance. It was the public reckoning Valerie had spent her entire life trying to avoid. The flashing red and blue lights from a dozen federal and local law enforcement vehicles illuminated the sprawling property in a chaotic, disorienting strobe effect. The street, usually quiet and secluded, was now a circus of activity, and everyone was watching. Every wealthy, judgmental neighbor who had ever looked down on me was standing on their immaculate lawns. The cardiologist from across the street, the corporate lawyer from next door, the society wives who had attended Valerie's galas and whispered about my low-class background, they were all there. They stood in the cool evening air, their designer robes pulled tight against the chill, their phones raised high, recording every humiliating second of the spectacle. The pristine illusion of the Hastings family, the very foundation of their black elite status, was being broadcast in real time to the entire neighborhood. But it wasn't just the neighbors. The local news vans, tipped off by the FBI press office, as part of a coordinated media strategy, had already arrived. Huge glaring spotlights mounted on the news trucks cut through the darkness, illuminating the driveway like a stage. Reporters with microphones were shouting questions over the din of the sirens, camera operators jostling for the best angle of the fallen matriarch. "Mrs. Hastings, are the allegations of money laundering true?" a reporter yelled, thrusting a microphone toward Valerie as she was led down the front steps. "Darius, did you embezzle from your own mother's charity?" Another shouted, the camera flash capturing the tear-streaked, terrified face of my soon-to-be ex-husband. Valerie tried to shrink away from the glaring lights, but there was nowhere to hide. The woman who had thrived on public adoration, who had demanded respect and deference from everyone she encountered, was now a public spectacle of disgrace. Her expensive silk suit looked rumpled and pathetic. The heavy silver handcuffs binding her wrists glinted under the news camera's lights. She couldn't gaslight her way out of this. She couldn't charm the reporters or bribe the neighbors to look away. She was entirely, irreversibly exposed. I stood on the top step of the porch holding Jamal, watching them walk the length of the driveway. This was not a moment of vindictive joy. It was a moment of profound clinical satisfaction. I was watching a tumor being excised from my life. As they reached the line of waiting federal transport vehicles, Keisha suddenly stopped. She turned back toward the house, her face illuminated by the flashing police lights. The influencer who had mocked my cheap clothes and my working-class roots looked up at me, her expression a mix of hatred and absolute desperation. She opened her mouth, perhaps to hurl one last insult, perhaps to beg for mercy one last time. An agent firmly placed a hand on her head, guiding her down and shoving her into the back of a black SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off whatever she had intended to say. Trayvon followed without a word, his head hanging so low it nearly touched his chest. He disappeared into the vehicle, a broken, defeated man who had traded his integrity for a life he could never afford. Darius was next. He paused before stepping into the transport van, looking back up the driveway. He didn't look at the news cameras. He didn't look at the whispering neighbors. He looked directly at me. He saw me standing there, strong, untouchable, holding the son he had just legally signed away to save himself. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer him a comforting glance or a tear of regret. I stared back at him with the cold, unyielding gaze of a woman who had finally recognized her own worth. Darius swallowed hard tears fresh on his cheeks. He opened his mouth, whispering something that was drowned out by the noise of the scene. I didn't need to hear it. It didn't matter anymore. An agent nudged him forward, and Darius disappeared into the darkness of the federal transport vehicle. Finally, it was Valerie's turn. She stood by the open door of the lead FBI vehicle, the flashing lights reflecting in her eyes. The surrounding reporters were shouting a barrage of questions, demanding a statement from the disgraced philanthropist. Valerie ignored them. She turned her head, her gaze traveling up the long, sweeping driveway until it locked onto mine. For a long, agonizing moment, the matriarch of the Hastings family stared at the daughter-in-law she had tried to destroy. The mask of the black elite had melted away entirely. There was no arrogance left. There was no superiority. There was only the raw, visceral reality of a predator who had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and utterly vanquished. Her face was a mask of absolute paralyzing defeat. She looked small. She looked old. She looked exactly like what she was, a criminal facing the terrifying reality of her own actions. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten me with her lawyers or her phantom hospital connections. She simply stared, the realization dawning on her that I had not only survived her attempts to break me, but I had dismantled the very foundation of her existence. I stood on the porch of the multi-million-dollar mansion that as of this morning was fully under the control of the federal government pending asset forfeiture proceedings. I held my son tightly, projecting an image of absolute, unshakable power. I was not the victim she had tried to cast me as. I was the architect of her ruin. I didn't say a word. I didn't offer a parting insult or a triumphant smirk. The silence was my final weapon. I held her gaze for one last second, letting her see the complete absence of fear in my eyes. Then, with deliberate, measured precision, I turned my back on her. I stepped back into the grand foyer of the mansion, shifting Jamal's weight in my arms. I reached out, grasping the heavy, shattered mahogany door that the tactical team had breached moments earlier. I pulled it shut. The heavy wood slammed into the frame with a resounding final thud, echoing through the empty, seized house. The sound severed the connection completely. It cut off the flashing lights, the shouting reporters, the whispering neighbors, and the terrifying, toxic presence of Valerie Hastings. I stood in the quiet foyer, the silence pressing in around me. The air felt clean. The oppressive, suffocating weight that had hung over this house for years was gone. I gently pulled the noise-canceling headphones off Jamal's ears. He blinked, looking around the empty, dimly lit foyer. "Is it over, Mommy?" he asked, his small voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Yes, baby," I whispered, kissing his forehead, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "It's all over. The bad people are gone. It's just you and me now." I carried him toward the staircase, stepping over the debris from the shattered door. I didn't look back at the living room now, plastered with neon seizure tags. I didn't care about the furniture, the artwork, or the illusion of wealth that had poisoned this family. I had my son, I had my freedom, and I had the absolute, undeniable satisfaction of knowing that the monsters who had tried to bury me were currently sitting in the back of federal transport vehicles, facing the rest of their lives in cages of their own making. They had tried to lock me away in the dark. They hadn't realized that the dark was where I did my best work. 6 months later, the view from my corner office on the top floor of the federal building offered a commanding panorama of the Atlanta skyline. The morning sun reflected off the glass skyscrapers, casting a golden glow over the city my former in-laws once claimed to own. I stood by the windows holding a mug of black coffee, watching the streets below. The suffocating weight of the Hastings family mansion, with its oppressive secrets and toxic demands, felt like a distant nightmare. The air up here was clean. The environment was highly structured and entirely under my control. My desk was immaculate, free of the fabricated financial records I had spent 2 years painstakingly untangling. In their place sat active files, framed commendations, and a photograph of my son. The promotion to lead supervisory special agent came swiftly after the highly successful dismantling of the Oak Ridge psychiatric fraud network and the intricate cartel money laundering operations it concealed. The federal government tends to reward agents who hand them a criminal syndicate tied up with a neat, undeniable bow. Behind my oak desk, a television mounted to the wall played the local news on mute, The breaking news chyron flashing across the bottom of the screen caught my attention. It was the formal conclusion to the tactical operation I had initiated. I reached for the remote and increased the volume, letting the anchor's voice fill the quiet office. In a stunning conclusion to one of the largest financial fraud cases in Georgia history, former philanthropist Valerie Hastings and her son wealth manager Darius Hastings have been sentenced today in federal court, the anchor reported. Footage played of Valerie being escorted from the federal courthouse steps. She looked unrecognizable. The silk suits and flawless hair were gone forever, replaced by a drab, oversized beige prison uniform and a deeply lined, exhausted face. Her signature arrogance had been completely eradicated by the unyielding reality of the federal justice system. Valerie Hastings received a sentence of 35 years without the possibility of parole for her role as the mastermind behind a money laundering scheme operating under the guise of a community empowerment charity, the anchor continued. Darius Hastings, who pleaded guilty to embezzlement, conspiracy, and wire fraud, was sentenced to 25 years. The broadcast shifted to show Keisha and Trayvon. They looked terrified, clinging to each other as they were led away. The influencers who built their public identity on the hollow illusion of limitless wealth had been handed 5-year sentences for their complicity in routing the illicit funds. Their designer bags, luxury cars, and gated mansion had all been liquidated at federal auction months ago. They had nothing left but the inescapable consequences of their greed. I pressed the mute button, silencing the broadcast. The destruction of their lives brought me no malicious joy, only profound satisfaction that justice had been served. I turned away from the television just as the wooden door to my office swung open. "Mommy." Jamal ran into the room, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, a carefree smile lighting up his face. He was completely unbothered, thriving beautifully, in a way he never could have, under the oppressive shadow of his grandmother. I knelt down on the carpet, catching him in my arms and lifting him effortlessly off the ground. He giggled loudly, wrapping his warm arms tightly around my neck. "Hey, baby," I said, kissing his cheek affectionately. "Did you have a good day at school?" "We learned about dinosaurs," he announced proudly, squirming out of my arms to run over to the large windows, pressing his tiny hands against the thick glass to look at the cars driving below. I watched him with unwavering, protective pride. He was perfectly safe now. The $10 million trust fund my late father left me remained entirely intact, completely shielded from the greedy predators who had tried to steal it. That secure money would guarantee Jamal the education, the security, and the future my father had always intended for him. He would never have to worry about violent loan sharks, fraudulent charities, or the crushing weight of fake social expectations. He was finally free to just be a happy child. As I watched my son trace the outline of a distant skyscraper on the glass, I reflected deeply on the true meaning of excellence. For years, I had watched Valerie and her inner circle desperately chase a fabricated, toxic image of success. They genuinely believed that power was loud and demanding. They believed that excellence was measured by designer labels, exclusive country club memberships, social media followers, and the cruel ability to look down on anyone who lacked those exact markers. They worshipped a fragile, hollow illusion, completely blind to the moral rot decaying their foundation. True power is never a performance. It does not require a grand stage, a captive audience, or a gold-plated watch to prove its existence. True power is silent. It is the unwavering discipline to endure being underestimated by arrogant people. It is the sharp intelligence to gather undeniable facts while your enemies are busy gathering applause. True strength is moving in the dark, maintaining absolute focus, and striking only when the trap is so perfectly set that your opponent cannot even comprehend their own defeat until the steel handcuffs are secured around their wrists. I walked over to the large window standing beside my son, looking out at the sprawling city that had once felt like a battlefield. The long, exhausting war was finally over. The entire empire of lies had been reduced to ashes, and from those ashes, I had successfully secured an unshakable, prosperous future for my small family. They had arrogantly looked at a quiet, working-class woman and saw only a weak victim they could easily manipulate and discard. They deliberately tried to lock me in a padded cell to silence me. They forgot that when you trap a predator in a room, you aren't locking them in. You're locking yourself in with them.